how you define mindfulness. So the concept of mindfulness is becoming increasingly recognized by scholars and practitioners. With its widespread use, its meaning could be a little bit ambiguous. So how do you define this?
Okay. So as you mentioned, I've been studying mindfulness for over 40 years. And mindfulness, as we study it, is the very simple process of actively noticing new things. That's all it is. As you actively notice new things, that puts you in the present, makes you sensitive to context and perspective. The neurons are firing. It's the act of engagement, and which is an important thing to understand, because being mindful is energy begetting, not consuming. Now, sometimes people confuse mindfulness with meditation. I did some of the earliest work on meditation, and meditation is fine, but meditation is a way to set you up for post-meditative mindfulness. It itself is not being mindful. So no matter how you get there, once you're there, you're in a very good place. The work we've done over these 40 years has shown that virtually everything is improved by this active noticing. We have research on health, well-being, effectiveness, you name it. 40 years is a long time. So what we do is we make people mindful, and we just keep changing the dependent measures, and we find improvement across the board. What happens when you're more mindful is people find you more attractive. When you're more mindful, the products that you produce bear the imprint of that mindfulness. It's essentially, once you know how to be mindful, there's no reason not to be mindful. I got a call a while ago from this eager PhD student who asked me, "Professor Langer, is mindfulness just a fad?" I was taken aback, and I said, well, if, let's say, somebody shows you that you've been burning your toast every morning, and that all you need to do is very simply turn the dial down, are you going after a while to go back to burnt toast? Most people probably not. So it's not a practice, it's a way of being. And you get there by recognizing the power and uncertainty. Everything in this culture, in business and life in general, teaches us to be certain. But when we're certain, we're being mindless. Everything is changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So when we're holding it still, we're confusing our mindsets with the underlying phenomenon. And once you accept that you don't know, which is very hard, especially for corporate leaders, when you recognize you don't know, then you tune in. And when you tune in, then you notice. And when you notice, you learn more, and so on.
Excellent, thank you. So how do you see the role of mindfulness in leadership?
Well, mindfulness is the essence of leadership. Let me tell you about a study we did a while ago that at first may seem to have nothing to do with leadership. In fact, it didn't have anything to do with leadership when I designed it, conducted it. It was only when I wrote it up that I realized its place. So we had orchestras. Most people don't realize that symphony musicians tend to be bored out of their minds by and large, because they're playing the same music over and over and over again. They keep the position because it's high status. Okay. Now we take these different orchestras, and we're going to teach half of them to be mindful and let the others just be as they are. So we tell the comparison, we'll say the mindless orchestras, we want you to play this piece. Remember a time you played it in the past where you enjoyed your performance, and just replicate it. In contrast to that, we tell the mindful orchestras, we want you to play this piece, but we want you to make it new in very subtle ways that only you would be aware of. All right, so one is playing it the same old, one is playing it in the new. We tape the performances, and we play them to people who know nothing about the instructions, and they overwhelmingly prefer the mindfully played piece. We ask the musicians how well they enjoyed playing it, and again, overwhelmingly, they prefer playing it when they're actually there for the performance. So I started to write this up, and then I realized, well, it's kind of interesting that here you get superior coordinated experience by essentially letting everybody do their own thing. And that to me is the essence of mindful leadership, is to for the leader to be mindful, to encourage mindfulness in the people being led. And then everybody will take the same cues from the ongoing situation. And as that study suggested, give us superior performance. In another study, we had magazine salesmen who were instructed, each time you sell, learn the speech, the sales pitch, and then go say the same thing essentially each time you go customer to customer. We had the mindful group told, learn the piece, but we want you to make it new in very subtle ways that only you would know, and deliver it in that new way each time you give it. After they went to sell the magazine, somebody else followed up the customer and asked them to evaluate the salesman. And again, overwhelmingly, those who were giving the speech, making the request, selling, whatever, however you want to say it, mindfully, were evaluated as charismatic. Now, mindfulness is the essence of charisma. So to the extent that you believe a good leader is a leader who's charismatic, it follows that you want them to be mindful. What we did was a study with women in leadership. Excuse me. Women have a problem in that if you're strong in the way a man might, you're seen as aggressive, so that's not good. And if you're feminine and caring and whatever, then you're seen as weak. So what we did was have women be either mindful or mindless, and either male-like or female-like. So you had male-like mindful, female-like mindful, mindless versions of the other two. When women were mindful, it didn't matter whether they were male-like or female-like. They were seen as charismatic, authentic, and trustworthy, the characteristics you want in a good leader. More recent research that I haven't written about yet, that you might find fun, is, you think about making a whole organization mindful, and that may seem overwhelming. And some organizations are trying to do that now by having people meditate and so on. And meditation takes 20 minutes twice a day. This takes 2 seconds going throughout the whole day. Where was I headed with this? Oh, I can't believe that.
New study on leadership.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Okay. I don't know if that was a bit of mindlessness or was that just to get Michael back in the picture here? Okay. So what we did was to, you'd have one person doing whatever they're doing. It was irrelevant to the task, to our task. And there'd be a person next to them that's either mindful or mindless. Right. And then we test the mindfulness or mindlessness of the participant. Okay, so you're just sitting there, you're with somebody who's mindful or mindless. There's no big interaction between you or anything like that. And then to assess how mindful they are, we give them a little index card. And on this index card, it would say something like, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. And we'd ask them to read it. Those who were with the mindless confederate would read, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. Those with the mindful confederate would read, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. Now for the mindless group, we would say to them, how many words are there? So they'd say, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. They'd say 11. We'd say, we'll pay you for your accuracy. They still only saw a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. And the way this speaks to other more general issues is that people are oblivious to how mindless they are. And 40 years of research has led me to feel fairly confident that virtually all of us are mindless almost all the time. When I give talks on this to persuade people, because people can always see how mindless other people are, but oblivious again to how mindless they are. And I ask them a simple question among several. How much is 1 and 1? So Sophia, how much is 1 and 1?
Oh no. 2.
Okay, now, and what happens if I ask that question, people immediately thereafter tune me out because they think this is ridiculous. However, it turns out that 1 and 1 is not always 2. If you're using a base 10 number system, 1 plus 1 is 2. If you're using a base 2 number system, 1 plus 1 is written as 2. 1 plus 1 is written as 10. Easier to understand. If you add 1 wad of chewing gum to 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 is 1. 1 pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. In fact, in the real world, 1 plus 1 probably doesn't equal 2 as often as it does equal 2. And the larger point is, once we think we know, we don't pay any attention. Again, with everything changing, we're wrong more often than we're right. And a simple way of understanding this is just to realize that we're frequently in error, but rarely in doubt.
Frequently in error, but rarely in doubt.
Right. So we're mindless, almost all of us, almost all the time.
So applied to leadership, if I hear you right, there's multiple things happening. One is that when people are acting mindfully, aren't mindless, which is the common state, the habitual state, then they're more open, receptive to nuance. They see context more clearly, and as a leader, they have influence on their organization. Kind of, is it contagious? Is mindfulness?
Yes, that's what our little bird in the hand study is about. When people are mindful, they're able to take advantage of the opportunities in front of them that others are blind to, and they also avert the danger not yet arisen. Most accidents on the job, off the job, are a function of our mindlessness. The ways we understand people are also greatly influenced by our mindlessness. You know, I was in South Africa giving some lectures, and I had a day where I was just at the pool in this very fancy hotel. And there was a very large area of near the pool that was totally unused. And it occurred to me that it's only that cabana boy, the lowly worker in that organization, that knew of all of this prime real estate. And the point is that everybody has something to offer, and by our mindlessly vertical arrangement in a company, presuming that all is known and the all-powerful on top and the bottom knows nothing, we give up a lot of advantages that we wouldn't have to. And another way that this mindfulness speaks to interpersonal issues is that if you start off with a very simple realization that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else he or she wouldn't do it. No one decides to be stupid, clumsy, obnoxious, and so on. So what are they doing from their perspective? And when we ask that question, we find to say that the person we think is lazy is in fact insufficiently motivated. The person who is gullible is trusting. The person who is inflexible is stable. The person who keeps changing their mind is not inconsistent, but is flexible, and so on. And it turns out, if you think about it for a little while, that every negative description we have for somebody can be recast with equal potence, but oppositely valenced. And when you do that, then the whole organization works differently, because now people respect each other. You know, so if you had one of your workers, to tie all this in together, you had one of your workers answer the question, how much is 1 and 1? And the worker says 1, rather than toss them aside as an idiot, you know, implicitly, as too often we do, you might ask, how did you come to that? And then everybody would learn something.
Thank you so much.
Okay, now that didn't give you an easy way to figure out what to ask me next, but it doesn't have to be tied together. I'll tie it together. You just ask whatever you have on your card there.
Let's see. Well, this might feel tautological, but how did you define mindful leadership?
Well, the mindful leader is the person who is mindful. If it turns out, you know, that if the organization has deemed this person, given this person title, you know, so that person then is, by definition, the leader. If that person is mindful, then that person is a mindful leader. You can have mindful leadership at all levels of an organization, among the workers, there are still some people who have more influence on other workers than others, and that person is likely to be more mindful, and so on. But the mindful leader is not born, but is trained, or has been fortunate enough to have circumstances teach them that uncertainty is the rule rather than the exception. And the mindful leader is the person who can successfully exploit the power in uncertainty. So you don't have a person who is dictating how to do things, because all of those, what people tend to do is confuse yesterday's solutions, use those as answers to today's problems. And the mindful leader is going to be the person who's aware, again, subtly, implicitly, or explicitly, that things have changed and we have to see what works right now.
Wonderful.
I get an A for that answer?
You got an A plus A, an A and an A.
A triple A. I have that company. Okay.
Okay, so now I want to ask you about where you foresee mindful leadership research going in the next 5 to 10 years. Are there any areas or trends that scholars should be aware of?
Well, I say that there's been a watering down of the concept of mindfulness. And so if you had asked me this before that had happened, I would say the whole world is becoming more mindful. I think while that's happening, there will also be a dip, because nobody knows what they're talking about. They're not all talking about the same sort of thing. But I think that, as I said in my opening remarks, that mindfulness affects everything that we do. So that I would imagine that as an organization becomes more mindful, each aspect of that organization, so it's not just how to produce the product, but what product we should be producing, how to treat people in the organization, that's also changing. So I think that if you take the problems that people have for years considered the major issues for organizations, that the work on mindfulness will have different solutions than have heretofore been found. But over and above that, I think that the mindful organization will create new issues to explore. So rather than saying, how do we make this X better, more sturdy, smaller, larger, whatever, less expensive, more available, we might ask, how can we change it entirely? Not make it better, but create something that right now seems unheard of. You have, I don't know, I was going to say something about driverless cars. So you have a lot of organizations, and I haven't thought much about this, so I might ask all of your listeners to forget what I'm saying by the time I finish, but we'll see if it bears fruit. That driverless cars are great. You have half of the commercials on television will tell you about driverless cars. The other half will tell you about what fun it is to drive. And so I think that organizations as individuals need to put aside either or sorts of thinking and adopt and. That I don't want a driverless car because I enjoy driving. But there are sometimes I'll take a taxi because I don't want to be driving. Well, those are the times my driverless car. And I think that, I think that every aspect of an organization, if you gave me a list, in fact, maybe you, Michael, and I can talk about this afterwards, I'd have some ideas as to how each of those components can change. Because right now, organizations, like all of our own behavior, was formed at time one. And, we keep doing the same thing over and over again until now at time two. That makes no sense. So, for example, I'm also, when I give talks, I ask the audience, and especially for people over 45, and I say, okay, you're driving on ice, and the car starts to skid. What do you do? And then the older people in the audience say what you do is you gently pump the brake and turn the car into the direction of the skid. And that was what we learned for safety's sake. However, now that there are anti-lock brakes, that very behavior of gently pumping the brake will cause an accident.
Mm-hmm.
What you need to do is firmly hit the brake. Okay, so everything that we do right now was determined at an earlier time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Things are changing. And what we want to do is tune in now to see if we were to start right at this moment, would we have designed any aspect of our organization the way we did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, and so on.
Interesting.
So, you know, I was doing this work for this company. Some of these things are so simple. And because it was a very small organization, they would send out certain kind of mail, FedEx. The company grew. And now to send out all that mail, FedEx was costing them a fortune when all they needed was a stamp.
Mm.
Okay, so the solutions, a mindful solution doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be a reshuffling of the deck. Sometimes it's just small little tweaks that make very big differences.
It's both, right? The little things, these big transcendent things. So
yeah,
very, very, very good. Okay.
Very good. I got another A+. I'm going for the gold.
The gold, platinum, all the way up.
I'm going for the platinum, the diamond platinum.
Okay, so I think we have time for me to ask you one more question, and then I'd like to open it to the audience.
Sure.
So I'll let you pick. You can answer one of these two. I would ask you, reflecting on your mindfulness research, what have been key moments in your scholarly journey, or what, if anything, has surprised you most?
And what about the third question that I'd prefer?
Oh, those were two.
I understand.
Okay, well, the third question is, what types of research studies are you currently most excited about?
Well, we're doing a lot of health studies, and the health studies, excuse me, there are two types of studies that we're doing. I don't know if your audience knows about the counterclockwise study, but that was a study that was the first test of my idea of mind-body unity. Mind-body unity is very simple. It says, mind, body, these are just words. Let's put the mind and the body back together, and then wherever we're putting the mind, we're necessarily putting the body. So in the first test of this, we took old men and put them in a timeless retreat, retreat that was set up to seem like 20 years earlier, and had them live there as if they were their younger selves. As a result, these 80-year-old men, their hearing improved, their vision improved, they looked younger, and they got stronger. So it was remarkable. So we have lots of studies now. Let me just give you an example of just one based on this, and then I'll tell you the other approach we're using. We take people who have diabetes, type 2 diabetes. They come into a lab, and they're going to play computer games. And they're told, change the game you're playing every 15 minutes or so. That is just to ensure that they'll look at the clock next to the computer. The clock is rigged so that a third of the time it's going twice as fast as real time, a third of the time half as fast as real time, and a third of the time it's real time. And the question we're asking is, does blood sugar level follow real or perceived time? And it follows perceived time.
Wow.
We have enormous control over our health. Now we have lots of studies using that same basic paradigm. Then we have studies on attention to symptom variability, which is really just a code word for being mindful, noticing change. When people are ill across all disease, all problems, they tend to only notice when things aren't going right, when they're in pain, for example. The key to health is to notice when you are fine, because all through the day, so let me give you an example of what we do. And this is with people who have Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, arthritis, chronic pain, depression, stress, a large number of diseases, disorders, where we contact them at random times throughout the day, throughout the week, and we simply ask them, now? And is it better or worse than the last time we spoke, and why? And by doing that, let's take stress. People who are stressed think they're stressed all the time. No one is anything all the time. So by doing this, the first thing that happens is they see, wow, they're not as stressed as they thought they were. Second, by trying to find why now am I better than before, they go on a mindful search. And as I've already told you, that mindfulness is good for their health. And third, you're more likely to find a solution if you're looking for it than if you're not. So we get improvements across a host of these. And I think that what we can do, and again, I'll talk to you and Michael about this afterwards if you want, is to use this attention to variability to solve specific problems in organizations, because it's the same thing, whether it's regarding health or any other aspect of well-being.
Wow, so exciting. So exciting. I mean, turning back the clock like that. If you haven't read the study or you wrote a book on counterclockwise is a book, isn't it?
It's a book that starts off with that study and then goes beyond it, talking about our health, how to control our health.
Okay, we'll put a link later in the chat.
And there is a BBC
yes,
documentary called The Young Ones, right? That
yes.
yeah.
What they did was they took famous people in England and put them, old people in their late 70s and 80s, and put them in a retreat retrofitted to 1975, about 20 years earlier, or whatever it was, and had them live there for the week. And the only problem is, Michael, you can't get that in the United States. So everybody has to go to Great Britain, India, Singapore, to be able to see it. But if you turn on The Simpsons Go to Havana, which I think is either episode 7, season 28, or season 27, episode 8, Simpsons Go to Havana, they have a little bit on the study as well.
Oh my gosh, how cool. Pop culture, I love it. Okay, so now let's open it up to some questions from the audience. So Terry, have some questions here. Terry McNichols, would you like to ask your question? Terry McNichols.
Oh, here I am. Sorry. What you're saying about the timeless retreat, it just made me think of, as a child of the 60s, I always thought the nursing home I go to would have heated doors and, LSD brownies. But my question was, when you were referring to the charismatic leader, do we put so much weight anymore on the charismatic leader? Would that leader really align with the mindful employees who want to engage in processes and give input, approaches that are bottom up?
I think that we have a lot of data that when mindful, people find us more attractive and trustworthy. And so whether the person is called the leader or not, that is the person who's going to be influencing the company. In this context, I'm not sure bottom up, top down. If we just think of the organizational structure with respect to people, so we have the ordinary worker and we have the CEO on top, that worker who is mindful is going to be able to influence. And if we have the CEO respecting, appreciating the importance of all of this, then the programs that will be set up top down will, I think, bear the imprint of mindfulness. The bottom line for me is that to the extent that a company, whether top down or bottom up, is encouraging, nurturing, facilitating the mindfulness of the people in the company, is the extent to which it's going to be successful. Did I answer your question?
I have to mute myself. Yes, you did.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Sarah Tracy, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, fantastic. Thank you.
Yes.
So I am coming to you as a professor of human communication. I was actually Sophia's advisor at Arizona State. And my question has to do with the type of communication we have and its effect on mindfulness. So
Yeah.
in what ways does mindfulness change if we are engaging and really connected to digital media, social media, asynchronous communication versus embodied face-to-face communication?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. As an aside, I don't know, is Judy Burgoon still there? Do you know Judy? Because
she's at University of Arizona.
Oh, okay. Same state, different school. All right, because we wrote on mindful communication. Well, there is a language to mindfulness, and the language can be used, I think, digitally or face-to-face. The advantage of face-to-face is that you pick up all the nonverbals, and which adds much to the communication itself. But in lots of our early studies, what we simply did was vary the how absolute the language was. And when you use absolute language, then people become mindless if they take it in. It's interesting from a communication perspective. It used to be, maybe it still is in some people's minds, that women are weaker because they're more tentative in their language. And that turns out to be the language of mindfulness. So you would say, could be, it would seem that may, often, rather than it is. But, as you saw with Sophia, I said, how much is 1 and 1? And even though she knew she was going to get it wrong by virtue of the context, she could think of nothing else to say because she was taught 1 and 1 is 2, and that's the end of it, and you don't give it any other thought. So I don't see why digitally it would have to be different. I think, that with a digital medium, it may be easier to give people choices. And as soon as they see the sense to different choices, then they're already in a very different place with whatever the content is. If a physician said to you, you could take this drug or that drug, it would reveal that he or she doesn't know, which would then give you more control. So just giving choices. Now, I don't think I'm as sophisticated with respect to digital communication as you probably are. So direct me if that doesn't answer it.
Yeah, my gut feeling is that embodied face-to-face communication, we're able to see the nuances and the uncertainty. And one of the things that I see on social media is that we can't see small parts of uncertainty, and because of word counts, caps, and so on Twitter, that people come across much more certain and adamant.
Well, but that's a nice study, which would be, because you can communicate uncertainty. You can just say, as I did to one of the questions, I'm not sure, but, and the problem is that people haven't been taught to speak that way. And they haven't been taught to listen that way. So if you have the person right in front of you displaying some of this uncertainty, you sort of can't get away from it. Mm-hmm. But I think that both the listener and the speaker can be trained in a different manner. You may be right. It may be that when I say I don't know, but that nobody really believes the I don't know part, and then just tunes in, and if that's the case, then certainly that the face-to-face communication would belie that certainty.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, let's see here. How about Roland Barty? Roland, are you there?
Judy talked about her background. My background is leadership in a company, BASF, and I had another privilege. This is a very well-run company. I was brought up in Vienna in a Humanistic Gymnasium. Some people would know what that is. Latin, philosophy, Greek, mindfulness, I was taught when I was young. in leadership, I think I experienced 30 years of different leaders, and I found one comment by William George, who said that it's about deploying non-judgmental feedback in order to recognize what people do wrong and to gain confidence in, or to gain confidence and deploy confidence on people. Is this a very nice secondary division of mindfulness?
Yes, yes. In fact, if I were to consult to an individual, I'd say the way to be successful is to be confident but uncertain. And they're usually, you get people who are not confident and confident and certain, and that's the most mindless. And when you seem unconfident and uncertain, then the uncertainty rules, and people think you just don't know, what you're talking about. I suggest that people can make, and what they do at the moment is they make a personal attribution for uncertainty. I don't know, but it's knowable. You may know, therefore I'll pretend. So we have a lot of that in big companies. Classroom, Harvard is, you find a lot of it at a place like Harvard. And the alternative to that is making a universal attribution for uncertainty. I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows, because essentially it's unknowable. And by believing that is the way for me to stand tall, to be confident, and to actually, ask you your view, and to be able to appreciate it, which you can't when you think that you're going to be either found out or that there is some view out there that's different from what you're thinking. But I think that that we can understand this in a few different ways. It's not just that the individual, the company prospers from this appreciation of uncertainty. It was a Voltaire who said, he said it in French, not quite an exact translation, but although uncertainty is uncomfortable, certainty is preposterous. So when you do this, if you see, in a company, or I tell this to women who are being bullied, intimidated, to recognize that he doesn't know. And if he did know, the more one knows, the kinder one becomes. Talking about being non-judgmental. Being non-judgmental follows directly from the mindfulness as I teach it, because you come to see, as I said, that this person who you're thinking of as gullible isn't gullible, they're trusting, and so on. And if I said to you, do you want me to meet my friend Sophia? She's very impulsive. You'd say no. And I said, do you want to meet my friend Sophia? She's very spontaneous. You'd say yes. And so when you see that the way we're understanding people is influenced totally by our mindfulness. If we take a single-minded view, then we have strong likes and dislikes. If we open it up and take this more mindful view, we give up being reactive and can instead be responsive to the world around us.
Great. Thank you so much for these answers. Are just
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
Have the camera on the person who's asking me the question, because as apropos of the last discussion, the nonverbals can help me better answer the question.
Okay, that'll happen when they start talking. So the microphone will pick it up and pull it from them. So Stacy Gunter, Stacy Gunter, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. At the beginning, at the top of this program, I believe, Dr. Langer, that you said meditation is fine and good, and then talked about engaging in activities in a novel way. So novelty being a pathway to mindfulness.
Novelty speaking.
Yeah, and that is more effective than using meditation to cultivate.
No. I wasn't saying that one is more effective than the other, just saying that they're different. And that, what time will tell whether there's any extra advantage to one versus the other. It sort of depends on what it is you're trying to remediate. So that if you were dealing with just a person in their stress, both would be effective. If you have a person who thinks that problem is so big that my simple solution couldn't possibly work, then meditation would be fine. You have people who believe meditation, this is sort of strange and foreign, and for them, the work that I do is fine. But they're not at all mutually exclusive. One can and should do both. For me, that this active noticing of novelty reveals the uncertainty that is there. Once you see that you don't know, then you naturally stay tuned in.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Tatiana, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, joining you guys from Canada. So I'm also a doctoral student, and part of my old work used to look at conscious unconscious processing and the way we analyze information. And from a personal perspective, I've actually gone a lot into meditation. But I've noticed, like, when I'm mindful, it's a very resource depleting energy for me. So I'm wondering, like, from the way you talk about mindfulness, are you talking about like a more, I don't know how, like an attention thing that almost like shifts the way you make decisions? Or are you talking about effortful decision making?
No. So yeah. So Jennifer, what I said, and it needs to be said so many times because it goes so much against what people start off believing. People think that thinking is hard. People think that being mindful is hard. What is actually hard about both of those things is just the fear of negative evaluation. Thinking about a problem is great fun unless you worry that you're not going to get the solution. If one wanted to be successful all the time, just play tic-tac-toe with a 6-year-old. So we can arrange our lives so that there are no challenges. Mindfulness, as I study it, is energy begetting. It's the essence, when you're at play, what play isn't fun unless you're noticing new things. Humor relies on mindfulness. Now I will illustrate that to you, and remember it's a joke, so you have to laugh, and it's not my day job. Okay. So did you hear this clairvoyant midget escape from prison? That there's a small, medium, at large? All right. The only way that's funny is to realize you understood it one way, and now you see, oh, it could be understood in this new way.
Yeah.
All right. That's the essence of this mindfulness. Now, people are afraid of uncertainty because they mistakenly think that consequences in and of themselves are positive or negative. So right now, everybody wants to, if it's good, you must have it. If it's bad, you must stay away from it. And as you become more mindful, you come to see that the consequences in your head, not in the thing you're evaluating. So no matter what it is both good, bad, or indifferent. You're going to take me out to dinner and the food is good. That's wonderful. You take me out to dinner, the food is awful. That's wonderful. I'll eat less. Which for me would be an odd thing, but good for my waistline. So the point is that if we are in charge of how to understand outcomes, then we don't have to be afraid of uncertainty.
Okay. So it sounds like what you're talking about is kind of offloading certain tasks that people obsess with, and that's probably what's adding to this effortful thinking.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of understanding it, that the solving problems is not difficult in and of itself. It's, it's the challenge, the sort of thing that we all crave. However, the fear that we're going to fail is also what we are most frightened of. And so we take away that fear part. You know, so you have people when they're playing games, they're not nervous in the same way as if they're going to go take an exam. You know, but doing mainly the same things. Now, you raise the problem of decision making, and we don't have time now for me to go into my whole theory of decision making. If you write to me, I'll send you a copy of the paper. But the bottom line will surprise you. The bottom line is we should not be spending time trying to make the right decision, but instead making the decision right. Because once you take just a few things I've already said, that outcomes are in your head. So that means when you're doing a cost-benefit analysis, if every cost is a benefit and every benefit is a cost, they're not going to tell you what to do. You gather information, but there's no endpoint to the amount of information that could be relevant, and so on. And, you know, so in a not very complicated, but too drawn out for this discussion, you end up where it just doesn't matter. And so I, you know, who see myself as a very strong person who is involved in many activities, some of which some might think are reasonably important. If there's somebody else who, you know, if you and I were close and we're living together, and you wanted to go to this movie, to that restaurant, see this people, you know, we're going to work together, write the paper, it would make a difference to me. Sure. Whatever it is you want to do is fine, because I'm going to enjoy it and make it into something important for myself regardless. You see what I'm saying? So when people think you have to make the right decisions in order to achieve a certain amount of success, I think that somebody else's plan derived at time one, now things are different. You have all these people who decide what their major is going to be in school, and decide at 15 years old they're going to be doctors or actors or ballet dancers, decide in a company how things are going to be set in motion. Whatever the decisions we're making, they're almost always made now for some future time. And forgetting that between now and the time when we're going to put it into action, many things might be different. And people, sadly, are oblivious to all those changes because they're mindless. So in some odd way, there's less need for a decision because you're deciding it as you're going along.
Yeah.
You know, so you're not making it now time one for some very future time two. So if you're adjusting constantly, there's no point where you're caught off guard.
Okay. Okay. I will definitely reach out for that paper. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
And then I'm going to ask Lynn Bausberry, Jennifer Lynch, and Sunny Jong to just briefly ask each of your questions. And then Dr. Langer, you can respond to which or all three or both, however you see fit. Does that work? Okay.
That's putting a lot of pressure on my remembering what these questions are.
You just go with the last one. And
Okay.
So do you want me to go first then?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, hi, it's Lynn Bausberry, and I study ethical decision-making and diversity-related issues. And one thing I was thinking about when hearing this is the straw man arguments that get thrown out so much when HR is dealing with backlash to #MeToo type things. Like, you can't even look at a woman. I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's no HR policy that says gaze down the minute, right? So, although, and if there is, that'd be pretty bad. But so, do you know of any work that's looking at mindfulness with dealing with these thorny issues that are so divisive and tend to shut down conversation as people just entrench in their camps?
The short answer is no, but it sounds interesting. I was trying to think of what we might tell this man who's afraid to talk to a woman, you know, that she's going to then accuse him of being inappropriate. I don't know, except that if he were mindful, she'd be unlikely, you know. We wear our mindfulness, you know, that when we're mindful, people find us more attractive. And so my guess is that once people become more mindful, the problem goes away. But I don't know. I think also that if you're more mindful, you're picking up different cues. And so the man who, you know, and I thought of this in the distant past, and I don't know if it's worth sharing, but many of the men in, let's say, an academic environment, that when you're back in high school and college, especially high school, you know, the student types are not the most socially sophisticated. They don't learn how to be socially. You know, the football players, the athletes, I don't know whether they learn or not, but the tall, dark, and handsome ones that go into business have had some training, you know, on how to be accepted and rejected. And so I think that I don't know if anything I've just said is true, but this part I think is probably true. But there's a subset of people who've never learned to pay attention to the subtle cues that women are giving. And by not paying attention, you know, then they seem like bulls in a china shop. You know, so for that man who actually, if there is a man who'd make that statement, yes, I think he probably should stay away, because he's not paying attention to, you know, I mean, there are different kinds of smiles that convey how interested you are, whether you're being polite and so on. And if one isn't sharp enough to pick those up, they will behave inappropriately. But that being said, I think it's an interesting question. I'll think more about it and we'll talk at another time.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Hi.
Hi, my question is, in your experience, how does mindfulness relate to creativity?
Well, it's interesting that, let me answer that. You know, I could have called mindfulness, when I first studied it, creativity, because all it is mundane creativity. But the problem is people have a mindless notion of what creativity is, with a focus on the final outcome, when mindfulness is a focus on the process. And the process usually results in a finer outcome by other people's evaluations. So I think it was just a choice to have people actually pay attention to this new body of research. But yes, you know, when you're being, you know, but there are lots of people who have very mindless notions about creativity. In fact, in my book, On Becoming an Artist, I had raised the question of what mark could a child put on a page that an art teacher would make fun of them and decide that they had no talent. You know, that to know from that one mark that they weren't going to be a Jackson Pollock, a Picasso, you know, and not everybody has to paint like Rubens or what have you. And that was my journey, because I have this sideline as an artist without having been taught. So I've thought a lot about creativity. The book On Becoming an Artist, I actually, when I sent it to Random House, the title was Mindful Creativity. So, but they decided to call it On Becoming an Artist, and that was so early in my painting life that I liked being called an artist, so it went out under that title. Nobody understood it's really a book about interpersonal mindfulness. But anyway, so your intuition is exactly correct. To underscore it, the main difference is focus on creativity doesn't have to be, but tends to be a focus on outcome. Focus on mindfulness is on the process to achieve whatever outcome.
Great, thank you.
My pleasure.
I have a hopefully finer, quick question.
Doesn't have to be quick.
Oh, okay, sounds great.
It's the answer that has to be quick, not the question.
So I moved from scholar in research institute to teaching institute. One of the major reasons is the scholars in research institute is just not so mindful at all. We've been told by deans and our assistant dean that we close our doors, do not interact with the students and just focus on your books and research and publications. And I would stick up it one day. One guy came into my office and said, you are too nice to other people. You need to show your claw and you need to show your teeth that you can bite. And a lot of times we were trained that way. That we need to be aggressive. We need to be stepping on other people's success to be successful. And it's repeated all the time. And I'm here in small institution. I'm in a way doing mindful practice to many scholars. So I've been practicing mindfulness to like IT people, health professionals, and it worked out great. But just working with the scholars, with the PhD, they're the resistant subject, not like to be mindful. And
Well,
how do I do it, right? How do I practice?
okay, well,
scholars?
yeah, I've never heard that teaching anyone is best done by showing your teeth and whatever you describe. I think kindness is probably the best way of teaching anybody anything is to. But that being said, I think that the way organizations, be they institutions of education or large businesses, that they're designed to maintain the status quo and to deal out scarce resources. And in my newest book that is not ready for prime time yet, I'm arguing against both of these. But I think that I've never seen any data that said that this harsh approach is actually more effective. I think you get more bees with honey, as the expression goes. So I don't know what else to say about that. But next question. I see a questioner.
Actually,
I see somebody.
I think that's all the time that we have.
That's all the time you have. I'm supposed to say that. Okay.
By proxy, I'm trying to honor your time for you, so you don't have to be the one. Thank you so much, Dr. Linger, for coming on today and sharing your wisdom, which is really what it is. It's wisdom. There's so much wisdom in this area of mindfulness and scholarship in general. So we just appreciate you so much. And thank you, everybody, for participating and for your excellent questions and active engagement. This was a wonderful call. So I'm just very grateful. We are very grateful.
My pleasure. Take care now.
All right. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me or Michael Pearson, and our email should be on the event invite. Okay.